Sympathetic nerves arise near the middle of the spinal cord in the intermedial lateral nucleus of the lateral gray column. They begin at the first thoracic vertebra of the vertebral column and are thought to extend to the second or third lumbar vertebra. Because its cells begin in the thoracic and lumbar areas of the spinal cord, the sympathetics are said to have a thoracolumbar outflow. Axons of these nerves leave the spinal cord through the anterior root. They pass near the spinal sensory ganglion where they enter the anterior rami of the spinal nerves. However, unlike somatic innervation, they quickly separate out through the right rami connectors that connect to either the paravertebral or prevertebral ganglia extending alongside the spinal cord. Presynaptic nerves, axons, terminate in either the paravertebral ganglia or prevertebral ganglia. There are 4 different paths an axon can take before reaching its terminal. In all cases, the axon enters the paravertebral ganglion at the level of its originated spinal nerve. After this, it can either synapse in this ganglion, ascend or descend to a more superior or inferior paravertebral ganglia and synapse there, or descend to a prevertebral ganglion and synapse with the postsynaptic cell. The postsynaptic cell then goes on to innervate the targeted end effector, that is gland, smooth muscle, etc. Because if paravertebral and prevertebral ganglia are relatively close to the spinal cord, presynaptic neurons are generally much shorter than their postganglionic counterparts, which must extend throughout the body to reach their destination. The cervical ganglia are paravertebral ganglia of the sympathetic nervous system. Preganglionic fibers from the thoracic spine enter the cervical ganglia in synapse with its postganglionic fibers or nerves. The cervical ganglia has 3 paravertebral ganglia: superior, middle, and inferior. The superior cervical ganglia is the only ganglia with the sympathetic nervous system that innervates the head and neck. It is the largest and most rostral of the 3 cervical ganglia. The superior cervical ganglia innervates many organs, glands, and parts of the carotid system in the brain. The cervical ganglion receives input from the ciliospinal center. The ciliospinal center is located between the C8 and T1 regions of the spinal cord within the intermedial column. The preganglionic fibers that innervate the superior cervical ganglion are the thoracic spinal nerves, which extend from T1 to T8 regions of the ciliospinal center. These nerves enter the superior cervical ganglion through the cervical sympathetic nerve. A mature preganglionic axon can innervate anywhere from 50 to 200 superior ganglion cells. Postganglionic fibers then leave the SCM via the internal carotid nerve and the external carotid nerve. This pathway of SCM innervation is shown through stimulation of cervical sympathetic nerve, which evokes action potentials in both external and internal carotid nerves. These postganglionic fibers shift from middle axon innervations of their targets to less profound multiple axon innervations or single axon innervation as the superior cervical ganglion neurons mature during postnatal development. The superior cervical ganglion provides the sympathetic innervations to structures within the head. It's the important part, including the pineal gland, the blood vessels of the cranial muscles, the brain, the chorioid plexus, the eyes, the lacrimal glands, the carotid body, the salivary glands, the thyroid body. The postganglionic axons of the SCG innervate pineal gland are involved with the circadian rhythm. This connection regulates productions of hormone melatonin, which regulates sleep and wake cycle. However, the influence of the SCG neuron innervations of the pineal gland are not fully understood. The postganglionic axons of the SCG innervate the internal carotid artery and form the internal carotid plexus. The internal carotid plexus carries postganglionic fibers of the SCG to the eye, lacrimal gland, mucous membranes of the mouth, nose, and pharynx, and numerous blood vessels of the head. The postganglionic axons of the SCG innervate the eye, lacrimal gland, and cause vasoconstriction of the iris, sclera, pupillary dilation, widening of the palpable fissure, and reduced production of tears. These responses are important during fight or flight response of the autonomic nervous system. Dilation of the pupil shows for an increased clarity in vision, and inhibition of lacrimal gland stops tear production, allowing for unimpaired vision and redirection of energy elsewhere. The postganglionic fibers of the SCG innervate blood vessels to the skin and cause vessels to contract. Constriction of blood vessels causes a decrease in blood flow to skin, leading to a paling of the skin and retention of body heat. This plays into fight or flight response, decreasing blood flow to facial skin and redirecting the blood to more compact areas like blood vessels and muscles. The SG is connected with vestibular structures, including the neuroepithelium of the semicircular canals, the otolith organs, providing a conceivable substrate for modulation of the vestibulosympathetic fibers. There's our vertigo. As mentioned above, the internal carotid nerve hitches along the internal carotid artery, forming a network of nerves. Branches from the internal carotid plexus innervate structures in the eye, the pterygopalatine artery, and the internal carotid artery itself. The external carotid nerve hitchhikes along the common and external carotid arteries, forms a network of nerves, and innervates the smooth muscles of the arteries. Nerve to pharyngeal plexus combines with the branches of the vagus and glossopharyngeal nerves to form the pharyngeal plexus. Superior and cardiac branches contribute to the cardiac plexus of the thorax. Nerves to cranial nerves 2, 3, 4, 6, and 9. Great rami communicantes distribute sympathetic fibers to the anterior rami C1, C4. So you can see what kind of an influence the forward head posture can have on all these structures. The visceral afferent fibers will follow similarly close. Now consider the mechanical stress put on the lower cervical and upper thoracic spine in a rear end accident when the victim has a forward head posture. Unless the headrest is moved forward, it will have little effect or ameliorating the trauma. Upper thoracic preganglionic fibers, those ones going to the superior ganglia, will be involved. General visceral afferents in the air will also be affected due to the trauma to hold the elements of the upper thoracic and lower cervical spine. Do you see how it all fits in? Again, if your tests have no effect, move on to the next most likely hypothesis. As you heard me speaking there, very complicated. Brain, central nervous system, very complicated. The skull, sympathetic nervous system is very complicated. And I said entire fields just devoted to the ear or to the eye. You know, I'm not an ophthalmologist. I got no business really working on the eye. You know, I'm not an EENT specialist. I got no business working on that. I can't deal really counseling or psychiatric problems. I'm not a psychiatrist. But I can look for a lack of blood flow, though. And I can look for a lack, particularly in the upper thoracic, or redistribution of fluids in the upper thoracic spine, straighten that up, or maybe decrease the pressure in certain bones in the skull. No reason why I can't do that type of thing. Even though those last two scenarios are very complicated, very complex and specific. And you can read those. You can read that if you like, or any specific condition a person might be complaining about. Sometimes to get the very exact what's going on is really incredibly complicated. And in the beginning of the head neck, as I mentioned, even though many conditions affect this area, there's only really a few procedures. The biggest one is to get that head back, like I was saying before. If you can rearrange the fluid, if you can redistribute the fluid in the upper thoracic vertebra, the vertebral bodies and the discs, and the lower cervical spine, bring the head back, the sympathetics are going to change. And I've also found what changes is the postural sway change. It becomes more complex, and the standard deviation of the sway decreases. That's a relatively objective sign now. We do a sampling over 90 seconds. We take 2,600 samples of the center of gravity and look for the sway, and we can see if there's a change. Bringing the head back changes that. Okay, put your arms up again. Just by doing this procedure, bringing that head back, I've had people that have had pain from whiplash for years, all kinds of care. Just do this once, this procedure, then bringing the head back for the upper thoracic, they feel better. The other thing is if you've got tenderness in the head or ongoing headache, or this pain like I was saying before, like nuchal line pain or the temporal bone being affected, or maybe a lack of smell, that's the same thing. Sit down here. Sit down so you face that way. Just so you face this way. Lean into me. And again, squeezing that head, patient's tolerance. Sometimes you can have a helper to squeeze it more. Head's pretty strong, but you start slow. This is it.